I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Senator Richard Blumenthal voiced his support for the Right to Contraception Act on the Senate floor Wednesday. The legislation would enshrine the right to birth control and other contraception into federal law. This comes after the Supreme Court's June ruling to overturn Roe v. Wade, which gave states the license to ban abortion. Blumenthal warned, quote, "The United States Supreme Court has very carefully and deliberately sent signals about where it is going in the rollback of rights and liberties." Blumenthal referenced Justice Clarence Thomas's concurring opinion, which detailed other cases he believes should be reconsidered, such as same-sex marriage and the right to contraception.
A group of us will be speaking and then asking for unanimous consent on a measure called the Right to Contraception Act. It's called the Right to Contraception Act because it guarantees the right to contraception. If you had asked me a year ago, 6 months ago, would we need a Right to Contraception Act, I would have thought, not in my lifetime. But the fact is, we live now in the post-Roe era. It is a unique moment in our nation's history, not just because the Supreme Court has overturned Roe v. Wade in the recent Dobbs decision, but because for the first time in our history, we are rolling back rights. The history of our great country, the greatest in the history of the world, is that we advance and expand rights. From the time of our founding, the ethos and tradition of America is that we increase rights and liberties that are protected from governmental interference. And now with Dobbs, one of the core freedoms, the right to decide when and whether to have children, has been stripped from women and given to government officials. But it isn't only reproductive rights under Roe, because the United States Supreme Court has very carefully and deliberately sent signals about where it is going in this rollback of rights and liberties. And it isn't just Clarence Thomas's concurring opinion, which now has become infamous for its signals. It is the opinion of the court itself that clearly shows that this court threatens not only abortion rights, but also contraception rights. And in addition to mentioning Griswold versus Connecticut, Clarence Thomas also, or I should say Justice Thomas, with all due respect, mentioned Loving, Lawrence, Obergefell, all of them on the chopping block, all those rights on this Supreme Court's hit list. And perhaps the most deeply rooted of them all, in Griswold versus Connecticut, the right to contraception. Now let's be clear, the right to contraception wasn't stated in the Constitution, but the right to privacy is at its core. Don't tread on me. The right to be let alone. That's the reason that we have the Bill of Rights. That's the reason why the founders rebelled against England. Undue, unjustified interference in their personal lives. And so the right to privacy is referred to often as a penumbrum, but actually it's at the core of the Constitution that is so fundamental to the mindset and the mantra of those constitutional guarantees from the very founding of our republic. And The respect for the right of privacy should be bipartisan, indeed has been bipartisan throughout our history. The simple fact is that the most important decision any of us make, at least in my view, is whether to become a parent. And it ought to be a decision, not something that just happens. It should be a decision that is made deliberately. Every American should have that right to decide when and whether to have children, and politicians shouldn't be the ones to make it. They shouldn't be allowed to infringe or interfere on that decision. And women can't be truly equal if they don't control their lives, their reproductive lives, if they don't control their bodies, if they lose that right. They simply cannot be equal. So it's not just privacy, it's equality that is at stake here. My Republican colleagues are adamant in dragging this country back to a time when women had little or no autonomy over these choices. And I am shocked, I think many of my colleagues are, the American people as well, that American women today will have fewer rights than their mothers and even their grandmothers. We are living through a world where healthcare providers can't do their jobs and save lives without risking criminal penalties, and much of our nation will be at risk of losing these fundamental liberties. Let me be clear, this should not be controversial. This issue should not be one that provokes verbal jousts on the floor of the United States Senate. Griswold versus Connecticut, yes, it is Griswold versus Connecticut, has held for decades. It is enshrined in case law, reaffirmed by the Supreme Court, that individuals have a right to use contraceptive. But we've seen, after assurances by 3 of the members now sitting on the Supreme Court, that respect for precedent really is no longer deeply felt. In fact, may not be felt at all. What one nominee, Justice Kavanaugh, referred to as precedent on precedent, and therefore well-established law, that was Roe versus Wade. Now is gone. It was, in Justice Alito's words, egregiously wrong. But none of those 3 nominees expressed any feeling whatsoever that it might be wrong, let alone egregiously wrong. So to all of my colleagues who say the Right to Contraceptives Act is unnecessary, I would simply say, look at Dobbs. When I introduced, along with the presiding officer, the Women's Health Protection Act in 2013, the idea that Roe might be overruled was unthinkable. Our goal was to prevent the growing restrictions on that right that imposed excessive burdens. What was unthinkable then is reality now. The court overruling Griswold might have been thought unthinkable, but that danger is our present reality in the post-Roe world. So I urge my colleagues to join in approving the Right to Contraception Act today, to provide certainty and reassurance to women across the United States that they will have those rights. They can be sure of them. They can rely on them. They will know that having children will be